There's a version of you that exists inside a relationship when everything feels secure. You're patient. You're funny. You don't check your phone compulsively or read tone into short replies. You give space easily because space feels comfortable, not threatening. You bring your actual self into the relationship without editing it too much because the relationship feels stable enough to hold it. And then something shifts. A message doesn't come when you expected it. Something feels slightly cooler than usual. A conversation ends abruptly, and a different version of you appears, sometimes almost immediately, that barely resembles the first one. More anxious, more vigilant, monitoring in ways you're not fully conscious of, saying things you later recognize as driven by fear rather than genuine intention, needing reassurance in a way that feels embarrassing after the fact. Most people interpret this as a personal flaw, as anxiety, neediness, or emotional immaturity. What's actually happening is something more specific, more structural, and ultimately more explainable than any of those labels suggest. You're not two different people. You're one person running two completely different neurological programs, and which program runs is determined moment to moment by a single variable your nervous system is tracking constantly. How safe does this feel right now? By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how the attachment system operates in adults, why perceived threat activates behavioral patterns that override your actual values and intentions, and what the research shows about how to expand your window of security so that the version of you that exists when you feel safe becomes more consistently available, even when things feel uncertain. Stay until the end, because the last section explains something that completely reframes the way you interpret your own behavior in relationships and other people's. Let's start with the system itself. Attachment theory, first developed by psychiatrist John Bowlby and later extended to adult relationships by researchers Cindy Hazan and Philip Shaver, proposes that humans come equipped with a biologically based behavioral system specifically designed to regulate closeness with people they depend on emotionally. In infancy, this system keeps children close to caregivers by triggering distress when proximity decreases and calm when it's restored. In adulthood, the same underlying system operates, but now it's tracking a much more complex signal than simple physical proximity. It's tracking felt security, an ongoing, largely unconscious assessment of whether your most important relationships feel stable, reliable, and available to you. When felt security is high, the attachment system remains relatively quiet. You operate from what researchers call a secure base, a psychological state in which you're not using significant cognitive and emotional resources to monitor the relationship for threat, which means those resources are available for other things: genuine connection, playful engagement, honest expression, generosity. This is why the secure version of you in a relationship is often so notably different from the insecure version. It's not performing security. It genuinely has more of itself available, because the threat monitoring process isn't consuming the attention and emotional energy that would otherwise go toward being present. When felt security drops, when something signals that the relationship might be less available, less reliable, or at risk, the attachment system activates. And its activation is not subtle. It shifts your entire motivational orientation from what psychologists call the growth system to what they call the defense system. Goals change. Priorities reorder. Behaviors that would feel unnecessary and slightly embarrassing from a secure baseline become subjectively urgent. The monitoring increases. The need for reassurance intensifies. Behaviors aimed at restoring closeness, sometimes called protest behaviors, activate. Excessive contact, emotional escalation, withdrawal as a counterintuitive attempt to reestablish connection by provoking pursuit. Here's what makes this particularly disorienting. The behavioral shift happens below the threshold of conscious decision-making. You don't choose to become anxious and vigilant. The system activates faster than reflective thought, which means by the time you're aware that something has shifted, you're already operating from the defense mode. And the behaviors driven by that mode feel, from the inside, like reasonable responses to real threat. Even when the threat is ambiguous, misread, or entirely constructed by the attachment system's tendency to err toward detecting danger rather than dismissing it. This is why people often describe a profound gap between who they are in a relationship when secure and who they become when scared of losing someone, and why the second version is so difficult to recognize as themselves in real time. It's because the behavioral shift is neurologically real. Different motivational systems, different resource allocation, different perceptual filters. The person who texts something they later regret, who interprets a short reply as withdrawal, who becomes suddenly much more physically or emotionally clingy after a single ambiguous signal. That person isn't revealing their true self in the sense of their deepest character. They're revealing what their nervous system does under threat, which is a different and significantly more constrained version of what they're capable of. What determines how easily the attachment system activates, and how intensely, traces primarily to early relationship history, specifically how reliably and consistently caregivers in childhood responded to distress. When care was consistently available, the system calibrated toward security, a lower threat threshold, faster recovery, more trust that temporary disconnection doesn't mean permanent loss. When care was inconsistently available, sometimes warm, sometimes withdrawn, unpredictably responsive, the system calibrated toward vigilance, a hair-trigger threat detector, difficulty trusting that disconnection is temporary, a background hum of monitoring that rarely fully quiets even in objectively stable relationships. This calibration is not destiny, but it does mean that two people in the same objectively secure relationship may experience it very differently at a felt level. One with a relatively quiet attachment system, the other with one that's scanning continuously for threat signals and finding patterns and noise that the first person never registered as significant. So what actually shifts this beyond intellectual understanding? The most consistent finding in the research on adult attachment security is that felt security builds through accumulated experience of genuine reliability. Moments in which the attachment system predicted threat, the threat did not materialize, and the relationship remained available and consistent anyway. Each such experience provides a small update to the threat calibration, not a dramatic shift, but a measurable one. Over enough repetitions, the threshold changes. The system becomes slower to activate, faster to recover, more willing to tolerate ambiguity without immediately escalating. This means that within a relationship, the most powerful thing a partner can do for someone with a hyperactive attachment system is not to provide reassurance in the moment of activation, which often temporarily satisfies the need, but doesn't update the calibration, but to be genuinely, consistently, predictably available across time. Presence across many ordinary, low-drama moments builds more actual security than intense reassurance in a moment of crisis. For the person experiencing the activation itself, the most effective intervention at the moment of activation is often the simplest in description and the hardest in practice. Recognizing that the urgency being felt is a signal from an old calibration system, not necessarily accurate information about the current situation. Asking, is this threat real right now? Or is my system reading ambiguity as danger the way it was trained to? Creates a brief but real pause between the activation and the behavior. And in that pause, the behavioral choice can sometimes be different. Here's what ties this together. The person you become when you're afraid of losing someone isn't a more honest version of who you are. It's a more defended version. One running on older programming, with fewer resources available and priorities reorganized around survival rather than connection. The goal isn't to eliminate that version. It's to understand what activates it, to expand the range of conditions under which the other version, the one with more of yourself in it, can remain available. If this explains something you've experienced, tell us in the comments. What's the biggest difference between who you are in a relationship when you feel secure versus when you feel like you might lose someone? And if you want to keep uncovering the hidden mechanics behind your own relationships, the next video is right there.